long before humans learned to speak. One being broke the laws of heaven itself. He wasn't human. He wasn't even a god. He was something older, a titan. And his crime was giving you fire. The same fire that built your cities, forged your weapons, and lit the first night of mankind was once the greatest theft in the universe. The thief's name was Prometheus, the one he stole from, Zeus, king of the gods. What came next wasn't justice, it was vengeance. A punishment so brutal, the gods themselves looked away. Tonight, you'll hear the full story of how a titan defied Olympus and paid the price for believing in humanity. Welcome to Timeless Echoes. Let's begin. When the world was still young and the dust of creation had barely settled, the gods sat upon their thrones in Olympus, basking in their new dominion. Below them, the earth was alive, rivers, forests, mountains, yet humanity was weak. They wandered the cold nights without warmth, hunted by beasts, blind to the dark. The gods watched with amusement. To them, mortals were toys, fragile, temporary, meant only to worship and fear. But one among the immortals saw differently. Prometheus, a titan, older than Zeus himself, born of Iapetus and the ocean nymph Clymene. He was no god, but he had stood beside them when the great war between Titans and Olympians shattered the sky. While his kin fell to Tartarus, Prometheus was spared, for his mind, not his strength. He was cunning, patient, endlessly curious. It was Prometheus who shaped mankind from the clay of the earth, molding their bodies in the image of the gods themselves, breathing thought where there had been only silence. But what he had created, the gods neglected. Humans were left to freeze in the dark, helpless beneath the heavens they prayed to. Zeus saw them as nothing, creatures too weak to ever threaten Olympus. Prometheus disagreed. He saw in them something sacred, a spark of potential that even Zeus had overlooked. He watched them struggle against the cold and thought, what good is creation without the means to live? That question would change everything, because among all the gifts of the gods, strength, immortality, thunder, wisdom, there was one that humans were never meant to possess: fire. And Prometheus knew that as long as mankind remained without it, they would never truly rise. So he began to plan, quietly, patiently. A single thought forming in the mind of a titan who dared to care for mortals. If the gods would not give them warmth, then he would steal it. Nights passed, then seasons. The world grew colder and mankind weaker. Prometheus watched from the edge of Olympus as his creation shivered beneath the stars. He could hear their cries, not prayers, but the sound of life fading too soon. And in that silence, something stirred within him, not rebellion, but compassion. He remembered the wars of old, how fire had forged the weapons of gods, how it had shaped victory itself. Fire was more than warmth, it was creation, it was progress, it was power, and Zeus had forbidden it to ever touch mortal hands. To the king of gods, fire was divine, a privilege of Olympus alone. If mankind ever held it, they might grow strong enough to challenge the heavens themselves. But to Prometheus, denying them was cruelty. So he made his choice, not in anger, but in defiance. Under the veil of night, Prometheus climbed the path to the heavens, to the realm where the sacred flames burned. At the gates of Olympus, the air shimmered with heat. Every torch was guarded by divine sentinels, their spears blazing with the fire they protected. Prometheus waited, silent, calculating. He was not strength, he was cunning. From the valley below, he plucked a single stalk of fennel, a hollow reed, soft on the outside, but strong enough to hide a secret within. Then, when the sky turned its darkest, he moved. Through the sleeping court of gods, past the golden halls where ambrosia still steamed, he reached the heart of Olympus, the sacred forge of Hephaestus. There the eternal flame danced, pure, endless, alive. Prometheus reached into it. The light seared his hand, but he did not let go. He placed a single ember inside the reed, and turned away. In that moment, the first theft in the history of the universe was complete. He descended from Olympus, the fire still flickering within the hollow stem, shielded from the winds by his own breath. When he reached the earth below, he knelt among the mortals, their eyes wide, their bodies trembling. Then, he broke the reed, and the fire leapt free. The night that had ruled since the dawn of time was finally broken. For the first time, humans felt warmth. They saw light, and for a moment, they no longer feared the dark. Prometheus smiled. He had given them hope. But far above, in the thrones of Olympus, the heavens began to tremble. The light of that stolen flame had reached Zeus himself, and the king of gods was not smiling. The world was no longer dark. Fire had come to mankind, a gift stolen from the gods. Across the plains and valleys, the new light spread. It danced in every village, glowed on every face. The long, cold nights were gone, but this gift was more than warmth. It changed everything. With fire, man forged tools and weapons. They tempered metal, built homes, and conquered beasts once feared as gods themselves. They no longer hid from the world. They began to master it. Prometheus watched from afar, a quiet pride in his eyes. He had given them hope, and now they were becoming something greater. But above, Olympus stirred. Smoke from the fires rose high into the heavens, twisting through the clouds like a silent warning. Zeus saw the glow of 1,000 flames, spreading across the earth like rebellion. His fury ignited. Fire was sacred, meant only for the divine. And now, mortals dared wield it. "Who has done this?" thundered the king of the gods. But in his heart, he already knew. Prometheus, the Titan who had defied Olympus for the sake of mankind, the one who dared to steal from the heavens and give to the earth. Lightning split the sky. The storm began to gather. Zeus's vengeance would be swift and merciless. Prometheus stood upon the mountain's edge, feeling the thunder build above. He did not run. He had given fire to mortals, and no punishment could unmake that. The world below burned bright with life, and high above, the wrath of Olympus awoke. Zeus sat upon his throne, lightning dancing at his fingertips. From the heavens, he watched the glow of countless fires flickering across the mortal world, tiny suns burning against his will. The gift of the gods now burned in human hands. His voice thundered through Olympus. He defied me. He stole from eternity itself. The other gods fell silent. Even Hera turned away, unwilling to meet his gaze. For Prometheus had done what none before dared. He had bridged the divide between god and mortal. Zeus's anger was not only vengeance, it was fear. He saw the future, mankind rising, learning, creating. Fire was not just warmth, it was knowledge. And knowledge could one day challenge Olympus itself. He summoned Hermes, the swift messenger. "Find him, the thief of light. Let the skies know my judgment." Hermes descended to earth through clouds heavy with thunder. Prometheus did not flee. He stood upon the peak of Mount Caucasus, wind tearing at his hair, eyes fixed on the world below, the world he had saved. When Hermes arrived, Prometheus spoke only once. "Tell your master, I do not regret it." Chains of unbreakable bronze bound him to the cold stone. Above him, storms gathered. Below, the earth trembled. Then came the sentence no god had ever suffered before: eternal punishment. Each day, as the sun rose, an eagle descended from the heavens. Its wings beat against the wind as it tore at Prometheus's flesh, devouring what would always heal by nightfall. He could not die, for immortals do not die. He could only endure. And as centuries passed, his cries faded into the wind, not of pain, but defiance. Fire still burned in the valleys below. Mankind built, forged, dreamed. Their torches never went out. Zeus watched, and though his wrath remained, he could not undo what had begun. Prometheus had lit more than flame. He had lit the dawn of humanity. Ages passed. Empires rose and fell beneath the watchful eyes of Olympus. And still, on the lonely peak of Mount Caucasus, Prometheus hung bound, his body torn each day, his spirit unbroken. The world below no longer cowered in darkness. Cities burned with light, forges roared with flame, and mankind, his creation, had learned to wield power. But the one who gave them that gift remained in agony, forgotten by time, yet never forgiven by Zeus. The gods had turned their gaze away, but not all of them agreed with the punishment. Whispers spread through Olympus, of pity, of admiration, of fear. For Prometheus had endured what no god could. His defiance had become legend, and even the mortals spoke his name with reverence and sorrow. Then, one day, the silence upon the mountain was broken. A figure approached, not a god of vengeance, but a mortal-born hero, destined for greatness. Heracles, son of Zeus himself. He had come, bow in hand, on his journey to complete the 12 labors. And as he passed through the cold winds of the Caucasus, he saw the chained Titan, his body scarred, his eyes still burning with fire. Prometheus looked upon him, not with pride nor plea, but with the calm of one who had seen eternity. Heracles raised his bow. The eagle that tormented Prometheus screamed through the sky. With a single arrow, the hero struck it down, its wings folding in death as it fell to the rocks below. The mountain grew silent again. For the first time in countless ages, Prometheus felt no pain. The chains that bound him still glowed with the will of Zeus, but the deed had been done. The cycle was broken. Heracles stepped forward. "Your torment ends today," he said. "Even the son of Zeus cannot bear to see such injustice." He shattered the chains, and the earth trembled as they fell. The heavens themselves seemed to hold their breath. From the clouds above, a voice thundered, the voice of Zeus. "Enough! Let the Titan rise." But not as before Zeus, though angered, could not deny destiny. Heracles had acted under fate's decree, and even the king of gods could not defy fate forever. So a truce was struck. Prometheus would be free, but he must carry the weight of his defiance forever. Never again to challenge Olympus, never again to give God's secrets to men. The winds calmed, the mountains stilled, and Prometheus, once a rebel, once a prisoner, stood upon the peak, watching the world below. Fires glowed in the distance, the legacy he had risked everything to give. He smiled faintly. Let them learn. Let them build. For the fire burns not in their hands, but in their hearts. As he turned away, the last light of sunset caught the scars upon his wrists, a reminder carved by gods, and a testament to the price of compassion. From that day on, the gods feared less the fire in men's hearths and more the flame of thought within their minds. Prometheus, the Titan of forethought, had given humanity its first gift and paid the eternal price for it. And though Olympus would never say it aloud, even Zeus knew. The age of gods had begun to fade, and the age of man had just begun. The fire still burned. Across the valleys of men, sparks glowed against the night, a reminder of the Titan's defiance. Zeus watched from Olympus, silent, brooding. His thunder had punished Prometheus, yet his victory felt hollow. For though the Titan hung in chains, mankind still thrived. They built homes, forged iron, tamed the wild. Each flicker of flame below mocked the will of the gods. And Zeus, the eternal king, swore the rebellion of mortals would end, not with thunder, but with deception. If Prometheus loves them so dearly, Zeus said, then through them he shall suffer yet again. He would not strike man with lightning, he would strike their hearts. He would give them a gift. He called upon Hephaestus, god of the forge. "Fashion me a being," Zeus commanded, "a creature unlike any other, beautiful, flawless, irresistible, yet mortal." Hephaestus obeyed. From the clay of the earth, the same earth Prometheus had shaped man from, he molded a new form, the figure of a woman, perfectly built, delicate yet strong. When the last curve was carved, Zeus breathed life into her. She opened her eyes, clear as dawn. But she was not yet complete. The gods of Olympus gathered around her, each bestowing a gift. Athena gave her wisdom and grace. Aphrodite gave her beauty and desire. Hermes gave her charm and cunning. Hera gave her curiosity, deep as the sea. Even Apollo smiled, gifting her a voice that could melt the hardest heart. They named her Pandora, the all-gifted. To mankind she was meant to seem a blessing, but to Zeus she was vengeance wrapped in beauty. When Prometheus heard of this creation, he knew the gods too well. He warned his brother, Prometheus, the one who acted after thought. "Do not accept any gift from Olympus," Prometheus said, "for where gods give, they also take." But Prometheus was kind-hearted and foolish. When Pandora descended from Olympus, radiant as starlight, he forgot his brother's warning. He took her hand, welcomed her into his home, and the earth itself seemed to rejoice. Yet, behind her beauty, she carried a gift of her own, a jar sealed by the hand of Zeus himself. She had been told never to open it, but the gods had given her curiosity, and curiosity was the spark of all ruin. Days passed. The jar sat in their home, silent and waiting. Pandora's eyes lingered upon it. She wondered what wonders it held, gold, perhaps, or wisdom from the heavens. The thought grew louder in her mind, whispering like a heartbeat. Finally, one night, unable to bear it, she touched the lid. Just a glimpse, she thought. Just one look. She lifted it, and the world changed forever. From the jar erupted a storm of horrors, pain, disease, greed, jealousy, hatred, and death itself. They swarmed into the air, dark and endless, spreading across the earth like smoke. Mankind screamed as sickness fell upon them. Where there had once been peace, there was war. Where there had been love, there was envy. Every joy Prometheus had given, the fire, the hope, the progress, was now shadowed by suffering. Pandora dropped the jar and fell to her knees. She tried to close it, but it was too late. All that was left inside was one last trembling spirit, Elpis, hope, and even Zeus, in his cruelty, had allowed it to remain. For what is suffering without hope to endure it? From his prison on Mount Caucasus, Prometheus felt the cries of humankind echo through the winds. He understood what had been done. The gods had turned his gift into their curse. Zeus had struck him not through chains, but through the hearts of those he loved. Yet Prometheus did not despair. He had always known that progress comes with pain, that every spark burns before it gives light. Even through Pandora's folly, mankind had been tested, not destroyed. They still built. They still dreamed. And deep within them, hope endured. In Olympus, Zeus sat content. He had restored the balance, so he believed. Mankind was humbled, the Titan was broken, order was restored. But destiny had other plans. For while the curse of Pandora spread, another fate was already being woven. A hero, born of Zeus's own blood, would soon walk the earth. His name would echo through ages, and upon his path stood the chained Titan. The story of Prometheus was not yet over, because even gods cannot silence what was meant to rise. The world had changed. The age of innocence was gone. From the smoke of Pandora's jar, the human story began, no longer sheltered by gods, no longer untouched by pain. Mankind learned to endure. They wept, they fought, they built, for even in misery, hope had survived. Prometheus, freed from his torment by the hand of Heracles, now walked the earth once more, not as a god, nor as a ruler, but as a silent guardian. He moved unseen, watching the people he had made struggle beneath the weight of Zeus's curse. He saw them till the hard earth, forge iron with trembling hands, and raise temples toward the heavens that no longer answered. And though he could not intervene, though Zeus forbade him from ever aiding mankind again, He whispered to them in dreams, teaching them patience, teaching them foresight. The flame he had given was no longer of fire, but of mind. From that flame, the first ages of man were born. The poets of old would later call them by name: the Golden Age, when the gods still walked among men; the Silver Age, when obedience faltered; the Bronze Age, when war was born; and the Age of Heroes, when mortals dared to rise beyond fear. But all of it began here, in the ashes of Pandora's jar, under the watch of a Titan who refused to forget. High on Olympus, Zeus watched in silence. The curse had done its work. Mankind now toiled and aged, suffering as all mortals must. Yet, despite his wrath, they did not fall. Even through plagues and storms, they looked to the heavens not with hatred, but with longing. Zeus began to wonder, what drove them to endure? Was it hope, or the spark Prometheus had planted in their souls, the fire that could not be extinguished? He summoned Themis, the goddess of divine law. "What do you see in them?" he asked. And Themis answered, "I see your image, my king, reflected in creatures who do not yield." The words unsettled him. Zeus ruled the skies, but mankind ruled the earth with something he could never destroy: memory. They remembered Prometheus. They remembered the theft of fire. And though they still feared Zeus, they had begun to worship something more eternal, their own will to survive. The king of gods turned away, his gaze falling upon the realm of mortals. "Then let them prove themselves," he said, "for if they wish to stand beneath Olympus, they shall face the trials of the world I have made." And thus began the first age of mortals, an age of toil, of learning, of rebellion and creation, an age that would give rise to heroes, to kings, to legends, all born from the fire of one Titan's defiance. Prometheus stood upon the edge of the world, where the winds carried both the cries of the suffering and the songs of hope. He closed his eyes and whispered to the dawn, "Let them stumble, let them fall, but never let them forget why they stand." And in the glow of the morning light, the fire burned once more, not in the sky, not in Olympus, but in the hearts of mankind. The world had aged, and men had grown reckless. They no longer feared the gods, nor honored the earth that sustained them. Their cities echoed with deceit, their altars stood cold. Even Zeus, from the high throne of Olympus, heard the clamor of injustice rising like smoke. At first he sent omens, droughts, quakes, strange fires in the night, but mortals did not heed them. Their hearts had hardened. The gift once kindled by Prometheus had turned to arrogance. So Zeus descended in disguise among them, walking the roads of men to see if any righteousness remained. What he found was cruelty: kings feasting while the poor starved, temples defiled, guests betrayed beneath their own roofs. When he returned to Olympus, thunder followed his steps. "Greater than the race of men is beyond redemption," he said. "Their pride poisons the world. Let the earth be washed clean, that a purer generation may rise." Poseidon, lord of the seas, heard the command. He struck the ground with his trident, and the fountains of the deep burst open. Rain fell without ceasing, a deluge that swallowed valleys and tore down mountains. Rivers devoured their banks, temples crumbled, the cries of men vanished beneath the roar of the waters. Yet not all was lost, for Prometheus, still bound by foresight though freed from his chains, had warned his son, Deucalion, the righteous king of Phthia. "Build a chest," he told him, "strong as the heart of man, and fill it with what you hold dear. When the heavens break, steer toward the mountain of the north." Deucalion obeyed. Beside him stood his wife Pyrrha, daughter of Prometheus and Pandora, a woman of faith and courage. Together, they entered the wooden chest as the world drowned around them. For 9 days and nights they drifted upon the endless sea. No sun, no stars, only the sound of water and wind. At last, the storm began to fade. The chest came to rest upon the slopes of Mount Parnassus, where the peaks still touched the sky. When the waters receded, Deucalion and Pyrrha stepped onto silent ground. No voices, no birds, only the bones of a world washed clean. They wept, for they were alone. Yet even in despair, hope endured, the last spark of Prometheus's fire. They climbed to the temple of Themis, goddess of divine law, and knelt before her altar. "Great Themis," Deucalion prayed, "tell us how we may restore mankind, for we cannot bear to be the last." The oracle's voice rose from the sacred stone. "Cover your heads, loosen your robes, and cast behind you the bones of your mother." They were afraid to disobey, but puzzled by the riddle. At last, Deucalion understood. The mother is earth herself, and her bones are the stones beneath our feet. So they veiled their faces and threw stones over their shoulders. Those cast by Deucalion became men, those thrown by Pyrrha became women. Thus the new race of mortals was born, a humbler, wiser generation, born not of flesh, but of stone and endurance. Zeus beheld their faith and was moved. He withdrew the waters, let the rivers find their beds, and called back the sun. A rainbow crowned the clearing sky, a sign that the world had begun anew. Prometheus watched from afar, and for the first time since his punishment, he smiled. The fire had survived the flood, not the flame of the forge, but the flame within the human heart. And so began the second dawn of mankind, the age from which the heroes would rise, forged from the memory of wrath and the mercy that followed. When the waters withdrew and the stones of Deucalion and Pyrrha became a new people, the earth changed under their feet. The second birth of humankind carried with it a new hunger, not for mere survival, but for meaning, for glory, for a place in the songs that would outlast their bones. From this soil rose men and women, unlike the ordinary folk who tilled fields or kept hearth fire. They were larger indeed, sharpened by fate and touched, sometimes by blood, sometimes by favor, with a spark the gods could not wholly deny. These were the first true heroes, figures whose single acts bent the arc of towns, islands, and kingdoms. They were the living proof that Prometheus's gift had done more than warm hands. It had forged destinies. Listen to how the age begins, not with a single victory, but with 1,000 tests that taught craft and cunning, mercy and ruin. Perseus was born of a secret union, Danae and Zeus, and raised by the quiet courage of a mother who survived a king's cruelty. Sent on a mission meant to be his death, he faced Medusa, the last of the Gorgons, whose gaze turned flesh to stone. He did not charge blindly. Athena lent him counsel and a polished shield to see the monster without meeting its eyes. Hermes lent swift sandals and a guiding hand. Hades' helm granted concealment. With cunning and mercy, Perseus cut the Gorgon's head and later used that dreadful trophy to rescue Andromeda from a sea monster. His tale showed mortals a truth, that wit, a measured heart, and divine gifts in careful hands could change fate. Across the Aegean, Theseus walked a different trail, from uncertain birth to the marrow of his city. Born to Aegeus of Athens, and in some tellings with Poseidon's favor, he became the champion who ended the tribute of youths sent to Crete. In the labyrinth, erected by King Minos and designed by Daedalus, Theseus faced the Minotaur, the monstrous offspring of Pasiphae and a bull. Ariadne, Minos' daughter, loved him and gave him a thread to find his way back. Theseus's victory freed Athens from its dreadful toll and taught that courage married to cunning could topple burdens placed on whole peoples. Jason's voyage aboard the Argo gathered the first company of heroes, the Argonauts. His quest for the Golden Fleece, a symbol of kingship and sacred trust, tested leadership itself. Among his companions were sons of kings and men of skill. Their trials at Colchis required more than force. Medea, daughter of King Aeetes and a sorceress versed in rites and cunning, aided Jason. Their story is a double-edged lesson. Loyalty and love can win impossible prizes, and those same forces, mishandled, can undo kings. And then there were those whose names would swell into the greatest chorus of all, the house of Atreus, the princes of Mycenae, and the forces that rode to Troy. Achilles, son of the sea nymph Thetis and the mortal Peleus, became the measure of mortal glory and mortal grief. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, became the measure of human cunning and endurance. Agamemnon and Menelaus, princes whose quarrels and entanglements would burn cities, showed how honor and pride in kings could summon whole nations to war. The Trojan Saga taught the age a bitter lesson. Heroism yields poems, yes, but it buys them in blood. Heracles stands at the hinge between mortal might and divine consequence. Son of Zeus and Alcmene, persecuted by Hera's wrath, he performed 12 labors that remade the map of what a single man might endure and accomplish. In his labors were beasts and chores both, the Nemean lion no armor could pierce, the Augean stables that demanded inventive force, the capture of the Erymanthian boar, and the cleansing of human vanity through toil. Heracles' strength was a gift and a burden. His story taught that greatness demands price. Heroism in this age taught crafts and civil truths as much as it taught slaughter and fame. Through sieges and riddles, through voyages and labors, laws were born, arts were sharpened, and cities learned to govern the tempers of kings. Prometheus watched as the sparks he had given became furnaces of invention and crucibles of conscience. The gods still wove in secret, granting favor or envy, but mortals now answered not only to Olympus, but to their own deeds. This age would be incandescent, quick, and terrible, filled with triumphs that became the pillars of culture, and with betrayals that became the cautionary tales parents whispered at twilight. From the lineage of Deucalion stones sprang these names that would ring through generations, champions who showed how a single life could topple a throne or save a people. Prepare yourself, for the next chapter will fold down upon one life whose choices will split honor from doom, and whose name will become the voice of heroism itself. We will meet him in the turmoil of his making, and hear how his fate reshaped more than a city. It reshaped the heart of the age. The age of heroes had reached its breaking point. For too long, men had risen higher, building cities that gleamed like Olympus, speaking the names of gods as equals. And on high, Zeus watched as destiny drew its final bowstring. The threads of fate began to weave toward one war, a war that would end the heroic age forever. It began not with spears, but with an apple. At the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, a mortal king and a sea nymph destined to bear a mighty son, all gods were invited, all except one, Eris, goddess of strife. Spurned by the heavens, she came unbidden, casting among the guests a golden apple inscribed, "For the fairest." Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite each claimed it. Zeus, unwilling to choose among them, sent them to a mortal judge, Paris, prince of Troy, son of King Priam. Each goddess offered him a gift. Hera promised dominion over all lands. Athena offered wisdom and victory in war. Aphrodite offered the love of the most beautiful woman alive. Paris chose love, and that choice would burn 1,000 ships. The woman was Helen, wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. When Paris sailed to Sparta, fate and desire entangled. Helen left with him to Troy. Whether by enchantment or choice, the act shattered the fragile peace of Greece. Menelaus called upon his brother, Agamemnon of Mycenae, to honor the oaths sworn by all her suitors, to defend her marriage. From every shore kings and heroes gathered, Odysseus of Ithaca, reluctant but bound by oath, Ajax, great and lesser, warriors of towering strength, Nestor, the wise old counselor of Pylos, and Achilles, son of Peleus and Thetis, the greatest of all mortal warriors, whose very birth had been blessed and cursed by prophecy. The fleet of 1,000 ships set sail for Troy, and the gods themselves chose sides. Hera and Athena, still scorned by Paris's choice, stood with the Greeks. Aphrodite, faithful to her promise, shielded Troy. Apollo lent his bow to its walls, and Zeus watched, waiting for the scales to balance. For 10 long years the war raged, not merely a clash of armies, but of ideals, pride, vengeance, and the measure of man. Achilles' wrath burned brighter than the sun. When Agamemnon seized his captive Briseis, the hero withdrew, and the Greeks faltered. Only when his dearest companion Patroclus fell to Hector, Prince of Troy, did Achilles return. His grief turned to a fury that even the gods could not temper. The duel between Achilles and Hector shook the plain beneath Troy's walls. When it ended, Hector lay slain, and Achilles, though triumphant, had sealed his own fate. For his mother, Thetis had foretold, "You may live long, forgotten, or die young, and your name will never fade." He chose immortality of memory over the safety of years. Soon after, Paris, guided by Apollo, loosed an arrow that struck Achilles in his only mortal place, the heel. The greatest warrior of Greece fell, and with him fell the heart of the age. The Greeks, desperate to end the endless siege, turned to cunning over strength. Odysseus conceived the final gambit, the wooden horse, a gift feigned to honor Troy. Inside it hid the last warriors of Greece. The Trojans, blinded by victory, drew it within their gates. That night, under the sleeping stars, the horse opened. Fire and sword descended upon Troy. The city of Priam, proud, beautiful, divine protected, was undone in a single dawn. Altars burned, temples fell, and the cries of men and gods mingled in the wind. The war of gods and men had ended, not in triumph, but in silence. For the gods themselves were wearied by mortal ambition. Zeus decreed that the line of heroes, those born of divine and mortal blood, would fade, their time complete. No longer would the children of gods walk freely among men. Prometheus's gift, the fire of thought, now belonged solely to mortals. The gods would watch, distant and unseen, as mankind forged its destiny without divine hand. The age of heroes was over, and from its ashes the age of history would rise, when men, no longer aided by Olympus, would write their own myths in blood and stone. Prometheus watched, unseen, as the last embers of Troy's fire glowed against the dawn. He whispered to the wind, not in sorrow, but in quiet pride, "The flame endures. Let them build their own Olympus." The fires of Troy burned for days. The wind carried the ashes of heroes across the sea, ashes of cities, of promises, of an age that could never return. When the embers died, the silence that followed was unlike any the world had known. For the first time, Olympus itself grew quiet. The gods had watched men destroy one another with the gifts they once begged for: courage, cunning, passion, and pride. Zeus looked down upon the blackened plains and saw the truth of his own decree fulfilled. The age of heroes had ended. From this moment forward, mortals would stand alone. Those who survived the war returned to lands haunted by memory. Agamemnon came home to Mycenae, only to meet death at the hands of his own wife, Clytemnestra, and her lover Aegisthus. Menelaus wandered until the seas returned him to Sparta, his throne restored, but his joy hollow. Odysseus, fated to wander far longer, faced storms, monsters, and the wrath of Poseidon before he set foot once more on Ithaca's soil, a king grown weary of glory. The sons of heroes could no longer bear their fathers' names. Where once gods had mingled with mortals, now their presence faded into dreams and omens. Temples remained, but the voices that filled them no longer answered. The people began to tell stories, not as witnesses, but as rememberers. And so myth became memory. Memory became legend, and legend became the foundation of history. Hesiod, the poet who lived long after these ages, would call it the Age of Iron, a time when men no longer heard the gods in thunder or flame, but in the quiet rhythm of toil, in the forge, the field, and the city wall. It was an age of labor and endurance, of short lives and long burdens. And yet, within it burned the same fire Prometheus had kindled. Prometheus still watched from the edge of the world. He saw mankind no longer waiting for divine rescue. They built ships without Poseidon's blessing. They raised cities without Athena's hand. They wrote laws without Themis's whisper. For the first time, men shaped the world by will alone, and in their striving, they mirrored the Titan who had defied the gods for them. Zeus saw it too. He no longer feared rebellion, nor worshipped obedience, for he knew this was the way of things. That creation, once given freedom, must walk its own path, even through suffering. The heavens withdrew their hands from the earth. The last of the demigods faded into dust, and the voice of prophecy declared, "Thus ends the age of heroes. Thus begins the age of mortals, where every man must bear his own fire." Prometheus, silent and unseen, smiled beneath the stars. His gift had survived divine wrath, flood, and war. The flame still lived, not in torches nor altars, but in thought, in art, in the defiance that made men rise after every fall. And as the constellations wheeled above the darkened earth, he whispered, "Now begins their true story." The gods had become distant, but their echoes lived on, in the courage of builders, in the voice of poets, in the hunger of minds that would not kneel. And the world turned toward its new dawn, a dawn no god had written, but one humanity would write for itself. The judgment had been made. Paris, Prince of Troy, had chosen Aphrodite over Hera and Athena, and for that single act, the fate of nations was sealed. The gods withdrew, but their whispers moved through mortal hearts like wind before a storm. In Sparta, Helen, daughter of Zeus and Leda, famed as the most beautiful of all women, became the promise Aphrodite had given to Paris. When he came to her husband Menelaus's court, he was welcomed as a guest. Yet, before long, the guest became the thief. One night, aided by Aphrodite, Paris sailed away with Helen to Troy. And when dawn came, Menelaus saw that beauty itself had been stolen, and honor with it. Across Greece, kings and warriors answered his call. For each had once sworn the oath of Tyndareus to defend Helen's chosen husband against any who wronged him. So Agamemnon of Mycenae, the high king and brother of Menelaus, gathered them. Odysseus of Ithaca, Ajax the Great of Salamis, Nestor of Pylos, Diomedes of Argos, and Achilles, son of Peleus, and the sea nymph Thetis. The greatest host ever seen filled the harbors of Aulis, 1,000 ships, sails swelling like white wings of vengeance. But before they could depart, the winds died. Calchas, the seer, spoke the truth. The goddess Artemis was angered, and only the sacrifice of Agamemnon's daughter, Iphigenia, would calm her wrath. In grief and pride, Agamemnon obeyed. The winds rose, the ships set forth, and Greece sailed to war. 9 years they fought before the walls of Troy. Achilles, peerless in battle, made his name a storm. Hector, prince of Troy, and son of King Priam, met him blow for blow. Warrior against warrior, honor against pride. Between their armies, the gods themselves took sides. Hera and Athena for the Greeks, Aphrodite and Apollo for Troy. Zeus watched in silence, knowing that the war would balance divine justice and human ruin alike. Quarrels broke even among allies. When Agamemnon took Briseis, the captive promised to Achilles, the great warrior withdrew in fury. The Greeks faltered, and the Trojans surged, until Patroclus, Achilles' beloved companion, donned his armor to lead them. Patroclus fell by Hector's spear. And when Achilles returned to battle, his grief burned into vengeance. Their duel, Hector and Achilles, ended beneath the walls of Troy. Hector's death echoed through both camps. The gods themselves wept, for one more mortal flame had burned too brightly to last. Yet, even as pyres smoked and heroes perished, the war dragged on, not for love now, nor for vengeance, but for pride. Odysseus began to weave new plans. Athena guided his mind toward deception rather than arms. The Greeks would soon craft a ruse that no sword could match, and the gates of Troy, unbroken by force, would fall by cunning. The Age of Heroes was reaching its breaking point. Prometheus's fire, that spark of invention and defiance, was no longer in the hands of gods or kings. It lived now in the minds of men who dared to shape destiny itself. Prepare yourself, for in the next chapter, the war will end, the city will burn, and the world of heroes will begin to fade into legend. 10 years had passed beneath the walls of Troy. The gods themselves had grown weary of the clash of bronze and the smoke of sacrifice. The fields that once bore golden wheat were now sown with ash and bones. Achilles, the mightiest of the Achaeans, had already fallen, struck down by Paris with Apollo's guiding hand, but his son, Neoptolemus, bore his name and fury. Odysseus still walked among the living, tireless in cunning where strength had failed. For neither spear nor siege had broken Troy. Its gates stood firm, its towers defiant, guarded by the will of Priam and the favor of Apollo. So the Greeks turned to guile. It was Odysseus who conceived it, a gift to the gods, carved from the timbers of their own ships, an offering to Athena, a hollow horse, vast enough to hide the bravest within. The rest of the host burned their tents, feigned retreat, and vanished beyond the horizon, leaving only the horse before the Scaean gate. Troy awoke to silence. The plain was empty, the sea shimmered with no sails. Laocoon, priest of Apollo, warned them, "Beware the Greeks, even bearing gifts." But Athena's wrath pursued him. From the sea rose serpents, twin coils of vengeance, that crushed him and his sons before the crowd. And so, seeing it as a sign divine, the Trojans brought the horse within their walls. Night fell. From the belly of the horse came the sound of steel unshackling. Odysseus, Menelaus, Neoptolemus, and their chosen few emerged. They opened the gates to the fleet that had returned under cover of darkness. Flames rose where songs once rang. The city that had defied a decade fell in a single night. Priam, the aged king, was struck down at the altar by Neoptolemus, though the gods had bid him mercy. Cassandra cried prophecies no one would heed. Aeneas, son of Anchises and Venus, gathered what souls he could and fled into the shadow of dawn. His journey would seed another age far from these shores. Helen was found, her beauty unaged amid ruin. Menelaus raised his sword but could not strike. Her face, the cause of 10 years' slaughter, stilled his hand. So ended the war of 1,000 ships. When the smoke cleared, only echoes remained. The gods turned away, their games of men done. Zeus watched in silence. Athena's favor dimmed. Poseidon's waves washed the blood from the sand. The age of heroes was over. The flame of Prometheus still burned, but now it flickered within mortals who would inherit the wreckage. Builders instead of conquerors, wanderers instead of kings. Prometheus, from his lonely height, looked down upon the ashes of Troy and knew the truth of his gift. Fire can forge, and fire can consume. The dawn broke cold upon the ruins. The gods withdrew to Olympus, and mankind, left to its memory, began to walk alone. When Troy burned, the seas took up the mourning song. Not all the champions who had sailed to Ilium returned as kings. Many became shadows on the waves, swept by fate, stung by gods, undone by their own pride. Of all those wanderers, none was more tormented than Odysseus of Ithaca. Cunning where others were blunt, he survived where others were broken, but survival did not mean peace. For Poseidon, avenging the blinding of his son, would not grant him calm seas. On his way home, Odysseus first met the Lotus Eaters, whose sweet fruit pulled men into forgetfulness. Only iron dragged his crew away. Then came the cave of Polyphemus, the Cyclops, a monstrous son of Poseidon who trapped men like cattle. Blinded by Odysseus's cunning, a spear, a name given in guile, and a wine-maddened ruse, the giant's roar called down the sea god's wrath. From that moment, the ocean itself turned against Odysseus. He landed at the hall of Circe, who turned his companions into swine. Only Hermes, with an herb called moly, taught him to resist her magic. Odysseus bargained, and for a year he lingered in her island's delay, learning the price of comfort. At the mouth of the underworld, he dug for shades, and there the blind prophet Tiresias told him of doom and of what he must avoid. The cattle of Helios upon the island of Thrinacia, the long sorrow that would follow if they were touched. He spoke of the long homecoming and of a testing that would strain his house. He heard the siren's song and bound himself to the mast. He steered between Scylla and Charybdis, losing men to the rock maw and the whirlpool. He passed by the island of the sun. His crew, starving and tempted, slaughtered the sacred kine. Helios's wrath burned their ships. Only Odysseus survived, cast to the island of Calypso, who held him in loveless paradise for 7 long years. At last, with the gods' shifting favor, Odysseus was given release. He drifted to the land of the Phaeacians, who, pitying the weary king in disguise, ferried him home. Yet Ithaca had not kept its peace. A house full of suitors feasted on his wealth and sought his wife Penelope. Only cunning met cunning. Disguised, patient, dark-eyed, Odysseus tested his throne and his wife. When the moment came, with Telemachus at his side, he struck. The suitors fell by spear and arrow, the home reclaimed in blood and justice. Penelope's test of the bow, her loom unraveled, and the kingdom was steadied once more, but not without sorrow. The cost of return left scars not easily healed. Meanwhile, another flame fled the ashes of Troy. Aeneas, son of Anchises and Venus, bore his father on his shoulders, the household gods clasped close. He fled with refugees in the night, his destiny not for gold or petty throne, but for a seed planted by the gods, a new home beyond the western sea. In Carthage, he paused, and there love rose, fierce and fatal, with the queen Dido. The gods tugged him onward. He left, and love became a ruin. Dido died, and the Tyrian queen's sorrow would become a warning sung for ages. Aeneas's voyage carried him through storms and nations, into the underworld where he sought his father's counsel. There he learned the future that waited in Italy, a line of kings and a city that would one day remember Troy in a new tongue. His wanderings were exile and foundation in one breath. Other kings fared worse. Agamemnon returned to palaces that had turned on him. Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus struck him down, a homecoming soaked in blood as retribution for distant crimes. Menelaus found his voyage delayed by storms and the gods' designs, wandering to Egypt before his slow return. Diomedes sailed to distant shores and was lost to many tales. Some said he never found his home again. The returns, the nostoi, were a litter of broken crowns and bitter hearths. These voyages did more than scatter the heroes. They taught a bitter lesson. The old bargains with gods had limits. The gods still moved hearts and winds, but they had grown less like companions and more like forces to be read and endured. Mortals learned to plot by their own stars, to read omens, to steer by experience rather than expectation. The age of wanderers was not a lesser age. It was a necessary one. It tempered cunning with sacrifice, destiny with suffering. From these long voyages came laws, songs, and cities, the civilization that would not ask Olympus for every favor, but would build and remember and carry the fire Prometheus had started into a new world. Prometheus watched as men navigated their own fate. He did not speak. He knew they were learning the hardest skill of all, to be human without a god's hand on their shoulder. And as the last ship from the great war threaded the horizon, the chorus of gods grew faint. The world had been tested by fire, flood, and war, and now it would be tested by wandering, by endurance, and by memory. The smoke of Troy faded into the distance, and from its ash the old songs grew quieter. Where once bronze clashed and demigods strode the earth, now men set stones and sowed fields. The long age of heroes did not end with a single trumpet. It dimmed like a sunset, slowly, inevitably, until the night belonged to mortals alone. Out of this dusk rose the first true cities, not merely camps or palaces of war, but places of law, craft, and memory. The myth-steeped founders who shaped them walked a thin line between legend and the human world that followed. In the east, Cadmus came from Phoenicia and planted the seeds of Thebes. He slew the dragon of Ares and, by the god's strange mercy, sowed its teeth into the earth. From those teeth sprang the Spartoi, the sown men who became the city's first warriors and citizens. Cadmus married Harmonia, and their house would linger in song and ruin alike. Thebes would rise and fall, a city shaped as much by fate as by stone. In Attica, the first king Cecrops, half man, half serpent in the telling, taught the people to bind the household, to marry, to bury the dead, and to name the gods in a new way. He planted the first laws and founded rites that would become the customs of Athens long before marble and agora rose to fame. Across the sea, Minos ruled Crete, son of Zeus and Europa, and from his thrones came codes and practices that shaped island and commerce. Crete's palaces held mysteries and crafts. Ships were built, bronze was worked, and a seaborne culture spread its influence. None of these were simple births of civility. Cities were built on memory and price. The same hands that learned to temper bronze also learned to bind laws, to judge disputes, to record births and deaths, and to pass songs from father to son. Where once heroes solved wrongs with spear and oath, now councils and elders did their work. Rome's future seed was planted in the smoke of Troy as well. Aeneas, who had carried his father from the flames, wandered far from the ruins and finally touched Italian shores. He founded Lavinium. His son Ascanius, also called Iulus, would found Alba Longa, and from that line, in the songs and later histories, would come the twin founders remembered in a different tongue. The Trojan past did not die. It migrated, a seed that would grow in another soil. From these foundations rose trades and laws. Men learned to read omens rather than expect gods to strike openly. They measured rains and sowed according to seasons. They wrote names on clay and kept accounts of grain. Craftsmen perfected bronze into tools and plows. Sailors mapped coasts and stars by practice rather than supplication. Houses multiplied into neighborhoods, neighborhoods into cities, cities into the storage of memory. The poets recorded both triumph and shame. Hesiod and others would later name this time an age of iron, a hard age, in which men labored and suffered, where justice required law and not merely sacrifice. The gods' old interventions grew rarer. They became models in story and warning in ritual, rather than hands on the plow or shields in battle. Prometheus had given them the first spark. Now those embers were spread and banked by human hands. The fire did not belong to Olympus any longer. Men would take it, carry it, and convert it into empire, law, and song. They would make temples and courts, compose tragedies and hymns, and build ships that crossed seas Prometheus had once only watched. And yet, the old world did not vanish without echo. In the alleys and the hearths, in the whispers of women before they wove, and the prayers of men before they sailed, the presence of gods lived on as memory, a grammar of awe that taught humility and reverence. Fathers still spoke of Achilles and Odysseus as warnings and examples. Mothers still named children for fallen heroes. Festivals kept the stories alive. The gods remained, but as touchstones, not as constant companions. So civilization rose, slow, stubborn, imperfect. Kings would rule, laws would be forged, and cities would learn the bitter balance of power and justice. The age of heroes had passed. The age of men, for all its toil and sorrow, began in earnest. Prometheus, who had watched empires burn and be reborn, stood aside and listened. His gift, misused, misread, but enduring, had become humanity's inheritance. He had given them the shame of knowing, the pain of choice, and the glory of creating. That was the true turning. From gods who acted to men who would act in their stead. The world now belonged to those who would write it. The age of gods had quieted. The age of heroes had burned away. Now, only the echo remained, the pulse of creation that Prometheus had kindled long ago. He stood once more upon the edge of the world where sky met sea, the same place where he had first defied Zeus. The winds no longer carried the roar of thunder. Olympus had turned inward, content to watch from afar. Mankind no longer looked upward for rescue. They looked to their own hands. Cities rose like constellations on the earth. Thebes, Athens, Mycenae, and 100 nameless towns. The bronze of war became the bronze of plow and chisel. Where once they prayed for miracles, now they carved their own. Temples to Zeus still crowned the hills, but inside, mortals debated justice, wrote poems, and measured the stars. Prometheus watched and remembered. He had given them a gift meant to warm, not to wound, yet it had done both. Fire had forged blades and bread alike. Knowledge had built peace and pride in equal measure. Such was the way of his gift. It could never be possessed without cost. In time, poets began to speak of the Titan not as a rebel, but as a teacher, the first to show mankind the price of freedom. From Hesiod's verses to the old hymns of Attica, his name became a symbol of suffering endured for the sake of light. Even Zeus, in later age, let the tale stand. The king of gods no longer struck with chains. The balance had been made. The line between mortal and divine had thinned. No thunderbolt marked it now, only choice. Each act of creation, each spark of thought, each hand that shaped or healed, carried a trace of that first flame. Prometheus knelt and touched the soil. Beneath his palm he felt the heartbeat of the world. Men and women laboring, dreaming, failing, rising again. The flame was everywhere, in the smith's forge, in the scholar's lamp, in the quiet courage of those who endured the long night. He smiled. The punishment had been worth it. He spoke, not to gods, not to men, but to the fire itself. Carry on. I am no longer your keeper. You belong to them now. The winds rose, and the last of his chains, long rusted and broken, were taken by the sea. In the distance, dawn spread across the horizon, gilding the earth in the same gold that once crowned Olympus. And so the story ends, not with conquest, but with continuity. The fire of Prometheus burns still, in every word spoken, in every act of making, in every rebellion of thought. It burns in the forge, in the temple, in the heart. It is the fire that never dies.